Good evening, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders, past and present, and thank them for their stewardship of the land. Welcome to our conversation with Jewel Parker Rhodes and Stephanie Stokes Oliver, presented in partnership with Northwest African American Museum and Elliott Bay Book Company. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation and the Seattle Times, for generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I have a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Our friends over at Elliott Bay Book Company have copies of both Jewel's books and Stephanie's book. They are open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, and delivery, and you can find the books at their website, elliottbaybook.com, and we'll also post links to the author's books in the chat as well, so you can just copy and paste that there. And I wanted to mention that we also have live captioning available tonight. So if that is something that you would like to turn on, you just need to click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen, and then the captions will pop right up. And then finally, after Jewel and Stephanie's conversation, we will have time for questions from you. You can ask your question at any time by writing it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And now I am delighted to welcome Lanisha DeBartoleben, the Executive Director at Northwest African American Museum, who will introduce tonight's program. Hi, Lanisha.
Hello there, Stesha. Thank you so much. And hello to you all. On behalf of the Northwest African American Museum, located in Seattle's historic Central District, we are delighted to present this evening's talk in partnership with the Seattle Public Library and Elliott Bay Book Company. The Northwest African American Museum, or NAM as we are called, is a place where cultural literacy, Black artistry, and inclusive history come to life. And that is what tonight is all about: cultural literacy, Black literary artistry, and inclusive history. Programs at NAM aim to disrupt systemic and structural racism by educating and empowering our community to challenge, critique, and change existing systems of inequity. When COVID closed our doors, we started at NAM an outdoors educational program that we call Knowledge is Power. It's a book giveaway, and we distribute free, new, beautifully illustrated African American children's books in pop-ups throughout the community. And one of the authors whose books we've distributed to hundreds of children is Dr. Jewel Parker Rhodes. And so now, I am delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. Dr. Jewel Parker Rhodes is the author of numerous novels for adults, including Voodoo Dreams and Douglas's Women, as well as the memoir Porch Stories, A Grandmother's Guide to Happiness, and 2 writing guides. Jewel is also the author of 6 books for youth, including the New York Times bestseller Ghost Boys, and most recently, Chicago Public Library's Best of the Best 2020, Black Brother, Black Brother. She has also won the American Book Award, the Black Caucus of the American Library Association Award for Literary Excellence, and the Jane Addams Peace Association Book Award. She's the founding artistic director and Piper Endowed Chair at the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing at Arizona State University. Jewel is with us tonight to talk about her book, Magic City, which was inspired by the 1921 burning of Greenwood. It has just been reissued with a new author's note reflecting on the 100th anniversary of one of the most heinous tragedies in American history, the Tulsa Race Massacre. Jewel will talk tonight with Stephanie Stokes Oliver. Stephanie is a journalist and best-selling author who currently serves as the head of SSO Media, an international consulting firm that specializes in book, magazine, and digital publishing. Stephanie began her journalism career at Glamour and then moved on to Essence, where she eventually became editor of the magazine and later editor-in-chief of Essence.com. She went on to become the founding editor-in-chief of Heart and Soul magazine. And most recently, she served as VP of Publishing for Unity Publications. She is the author of numerous books, and her latest work, Black Ink, Literary Legends on the Peril, Power, and Pleasure of Reading and Writing, traces Black literature in America, from Frederick Douglass to Ta-Nehisi Coates, in what O magazine calls, quote, a breathtaking anthology celebrating the power of the written word to forge change, unquote. That is the work of Stephanie Stokes Oliver. So you all please help me in welcoming right now Dr. Jewel Parker Rose and Stephanie Stokes Oliver.
Great, thank you. Hello,
Thank you.
everyone.
Hello.
Thank you, Stesha first and Lanisha for that nice introduction. It's so great to connect with everyone. And I just want to thank NAM, Lanisha at NAM, for all that you do for the community, because a museum doesn't really have to do author events, but because you care so much about our cultural literacy, as you said, I think it's a wonderful thing that you host launch parties. And I was very blessed to have had the party for my own last book, Black Ink, that was at the museum before COVID. And fortunately, it was just a lot of fun. That turned out to be even a surprise party for my mother's birthday. So I want to thank Lanisha again and her staff for everything they do for the community, as well as the Seattle Public Library, which I grew up in. First place my mother let me walk, my brother, sister and I, alone to the library, was from our house to the library and at the Douglas Truth branch, and also to Elliott Bay and Rick Simons in there, who has always been so supportive of my career and all of the authors that I love and know. And one of those authors is Jewel. I'm so excited that you're here and so honored to be with you today. If I remember correctly, I think we had a mutual editor at Doubleday. Was Janet Hill your editor?
Oh, yes, ages ago, but yes.
So I have been wanting to meet you ever since then. So that is why I'm just thrilled to be here today to talk.
I'm thrilled to meet you and be in conversation with you. You are a legend as well as a legacy in terms of Black women's spirits and literacy. And I join you in all the thanks to the Seattle Public Library, the African American Museum, and Elliott Bay.
Right, yes. So I wanted to meet you when we were both back east, as they say here.
Mm-hmm.
And now that you're here, I want to say welcome to Seatown. It's my hometown. And I would love for you to share what brought you here.
Oh, okay.
The pleasure of having you as a Seattleite now.
Thank you. And actually, I moved in just before the pandemic hit. So I haven't seen a lot of Seattle, but when I came here for my very first novel on book tour for Voodoo Dreams, and Elliott Bay was my host, I fell in love with this area. And for every book after that, I would always make my way up to Elliott Bay, and I tell my husband, I think I could live there. And about 20 years ago, he came here and he said, yeah, this is so beautiful. And then we came here for 6 weeks for a sort of extended vacation. And we've just decided that this is going to be our home. We are going to retire here. So he took a transfer that made it really just, wonderful. So I'm looking forward to discovering even more about this beautiful area, but it calls to my heart. It truly is my landscape. So even if I don't know much about it, it's my landscape.
Well, I will be happy to show you around. I was just in the Elliott Bay bookstore recently because my grandson had an assignment at school where he had to take Flat Stanley character from the book Flat Stanley around to different places in Seattle. So that's now going to be my, and NAM and Seattle Public Library would be one of those stops to take people around whenever they come to visit.
Wonderful, thank you.
So do you think that Seattle is a good place for writers? there have been several others. Octavia Butler lived here. Did you know Alex Haley moved to Seattle, and August Wilson lived here, J. California Cooper. So
Yes.
joining a canon of,
I knew about all of them except for Alex Haley. I did not know Alex Haley had been here. But yes, there must be something in this atmosphere, and my writing is done very well here in Seattle. Though I think the pandemic had something to do with that too. It's sort of like, okay, sit at my desk and I can't go outside or do as much as I would like. But no, I feel the inspiration. I truly, truly do.
yeah, I always tell people if this was weather like Florida or something, we wouldn't have as many readers, writers, and thinkers as we do here. And all the companies like Amazon and Starbucks and Google, all the companies in which people have to really be incubating and thinking all the time to be such a big success. So I agree that it's a great place for that. I wanted to show your book, actually. I didn't see if anybody saw. This is the cover for the new commemorative edition. And it's on the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. And I find it so fascinating when a novel is based on a true story to learn how the author discovered that story and made it fictional. I recall, for example, that Toni Morrison was moved by the 1856 article she read in the Cincinnati Gazette about Margaret Garner, who escaped slavery and became the
Beloved, yes.
Beloved, right. So would you tell us the story, the real story behind Magic City and how you became inspired by it?
Actually, I discovered the Tulsa Massacre in 1984. I was reading the Parade magazine that used to come in the Sunday newspaper, and the husband and wife team, the Wallaces, had a headline that said, "The only US city bombed from the air." And then there was this horrific picture of just destruction, like, you know, it had been World War II or something. And then it went on to tell the story of a young Black man, Dick Rowland, who was accused of assaulting a white woman named Sarah Page, and they tried to lynch him. The lynching never happened, but the National Guard was given permission to drop dynamite from airplanes on the community. There was all kinds of massacres from the white supremacists of the day. And literally this town, which was known as the Negroes Wall Street, which was the most successful entrepreneurial Black community in all of America, was utterly destroyed. And the final lines of this article included the fact that as many as 8,000 African Americans were interned. I didn't know that. And that they were given green cards so that they lived in this tent city during the winter, and they had to get a green card to go into town to find work in the white community. So partly I was motivated by, how come I didn't know this history? You know, I didn't even know that Black folks had made it out west. You know, I knew about, you know, the South to North migration, but it was just sort of like, where has this history been? And I actually carried that piece of article clipping with me back and forth across the country several times. I was writing my first novel, and it wasn't until a decade later that I had the research that I could actually begin writing the story. But I always knew it would be my fictional take on it, that I wanted to capture not just the town, but the whole era of America, the whole movement of, you know, spiritualism, and Harry Houdini being, you know, this great superstar, the ways in which white men oppressed white women, also the idea of war and how Black men who had fought so heroically in the war with the French came home to America really reinvigorated, saying we want our civil rights. And in not getting that, all of these things then contributed to why the Tulsa community had its massacre.
You mentioned conducting research. So you were living in Pittsburgh then, and you went to Tulsa, is that it?
Oh, actually, at the time, I was just starting as an associate professor at Arizona State. So this was the first novel I wrote at Arizona State. So it was a lot easier to get to Oklahoma. And yes, I did go there. And actually, in the library, I do recommend a book called Death in a Promised Land. And in terms of African American heritage, we all know the resonance of what the promised land means. Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. But Scott Ellsworth um, wrote that as a PhD thesis. And I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma to meet Scott. And Scott right now is a professor at the University of Michigan, and his book about the massacre has never gone out of print. And Scott was so welcoming to me and so helpful. But what I remembered in the 1990s was Scott saying to me, they still haven't found the mass graves. And that was almost as though this horror that I carried in my heart that really pushed me forward to tell this story. Now it's 100 years since the massacre, and they haven't still found the mass graves. They have found, though, what they think are 13 bodies. And I just discovered last week that they have now got anthropological evidence that they actually do believe that these 13, unmarked grave coffin bodies, victims of this horrific massacre, that they meet sort of the time period, that it's quite possible that they are 13 of the victims, but it's not yet certain.
Wow. How were you received by the community at the time? And you go back there and Victor?
Actually, in terms of how I write, the Deep Greenwood community is just a wondrous community, but I don't try to tell the story of people's own perceptions of what happened or what happened to them, right? That as an artist, I'm trying to tell the theme that's important to me about, uncovering Black narratives. And I have my own sort of like assertions as an artist. So my book, I would say, is inspired and it's reimagined. Truth is a slippery thing that a lot of people from their various perceptions, they have all their own views of what is true or not. And the novelist takes the whole chaos of life and possibilities of the multitude of perceptions and finds ways to sort of make them come alive and to give sort of like power to them. So I always like to remind people that fiction writers tell lies, okay? But we tell lies to capture the emotional truth. So people who have the history of the massacre in their family and in their community and have been part of the Tulsa legacy, they feel as though Magic City captured the essence of what happened to them. And very quick, and then I'll let you ask the next question. You can tell I'm a professor. I can talk, but anyway, I found out just last week that a 17-year-old white guy named Jeff Martin, he was in high school, read Magic City when it first came out. And it kind of shifted the course of his life. And he created a bookstore, very successful bookstore called Magic City Books. So for over 35 years, I've been thinking, oh, that's cool, Magic City Books, Tulsa's called the Magic City. And I just found out that my book inspired him to make a bookstore, and he said it in the Black community and said it in terms of our creating cultural literacy and racial understanding. So people read it and think I did all right.
I saw that on your Facebook page. I was so amazed that he said that he was inspired by your book. That's wonderful. And that he remembered that. Maybe you can let everyone know why it's called Magic City.
Well, Tulsa, at the time of the 1920s, it was not yet a state. but it was a territory that was extremely rich in oil wealth, so just exploding in potential. And everybody was going there, as to find a little bit of that sort of monetary magic. But it also had a great community of Native Americans, African Americans, white Americans. But unfortunately, the people of Tulsa, the white community, they were anti-union, they were anti-communist, anti-native, and anti-black. So it really was a wild, town that had a lot of segregation, but it was magical. And then from the black perspective, it was magical because you had this community known as the Black Wall Street, the richest community in all of black community in all of America. They had 2 movie shops. They had multiple lawyers, doctors. They had their own hospital. They had their own banking system. They had everything. They were a complete town. And so they were like this magical icon demonstrating that Black people could make an awesome, wondrous, thriving community. And I think that threatened people.
Some of those people may have seen your review that was very positive in the paper when the first edition came out. It mentioned in your author's note that it was originally published in 1997. There was a very complimentary book review that ran in a Tulsa newspaper, but it never ran.
Yes.
And a review and an interview with you.
Yes. When the book first came out, and it has a long history, actually my original publisher decided that they didn't want the book, that they did not like it, and I had to find a new publisher. And then when it got published, my editor left, so you lost that stewardship. And then when I got to Tulsa, they assigned somebody to do a profile and a book review. And the book review said, "Oh, you should get a Pulitzer Prize for this book." It was wonderful, wonderful piece. But the Tulsa Book World never, ever published it. And in fact, at conferences afterwards, the editor at the time told me it wasn't personal, but it showed you how people were so afraid of even a fictional rendering of that Black history. And people, in fact, called me a liar. I got letters from the KKK and colleagues in Arizona who did book reviews about the book. They were getting hate mail. And the only time that I've ever seen the KKK live and in person was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So one of the things with Jeff, when naming his book, he lived there, he was 17, and he said, I had never heard this history, and they had buried it. And so people didn't want me to bring it to light.
So is that newspaper still in business? Do you know? Did they ever mea culpa? Did they ever?
Oh yes, and actually, I haven't talked to them or anything, but I've seen on the news that the Tulsa Book World editor right now, I think, is actually a Black man.
Wow.
Yeah, so that would be a lot of progress. But they have also advertised Magic City. But yes, that's something that I should definitely go back and do. I think at the time too, there was a Timothy McVeigh bombing, and they were dealing with white supremacy and the attack on the federal building. And actually the sentencing happened during the paperback tour for Magic City. But it is very interesting to me too that America can seek justice for white supremacy, terrorism against white institutions, such as the federal building in Oklahoma City and the Capitol riot, January 6th. But it's still 100 years, and we're waiting for justice, not just in terms of Tulsa, but many other different stories for justice based on white supremacist attacks on Black people.
Yeah. One of the things that I hadn't thought of in a connection with this, but your book made me think of, was this passage in your author's note that says, the white assault ensued and the National Guard bombed Deep Greenwood, a thriving Black community known as Negro Wall Street. And more than 4,000 Black people were interned in tents for nearly a year and given green cards. You mentioned that a little earlier.
Yes.
To tell us about that, because that reminded me of Katrina, when I think in your book, you actually said they were in the convention center. And I hadn't thought of that being a place where they,
Yes.
but
And
in this case, they didn't want them to leave, right? They wanted them to leave to go to work.
Well, actually, since I wrote the afterword and said 4,000 were interned as the renewal, I've now seen other estimates that say no, it was 8,000. But a
Wow.
lot of people did in fact leave Tulsa. A lot of Black people left because they were in fear for their lives.
Sure.
But the internment was very much like that image of Katrina, where Blacks were not given the assistance that they needed. They were segregated, and put in that Superdome, so that there are echoes and similarities there. But what made it really terrible is that Black communities all across America, because you had all the people who were the Black porters on the trains. They made sure that everybody knew about the news. The Black newspapers all around the nation made sure everybody knew about the news. So money was raised. People wanted to send and give help. And the city of Tulsa declined all of it. Which I think is just really stark. So not only did they make it hard for people to rebuild, but they also, made it hard for them to receive any kind of ongoing sustenance. But miraculously, magically, Deep Greenwood did come back. It did rise from the ashes and they rebuilt it.
Wonderful. With that upbeat ending right there to that anecdote, makes me think of my next question, because I thought also of the Emmett Till story, which we all know the horrible ending. And I'm not going to give any spoilers for your book, but I just wondered, did you deliberately imagine a story differently, or was it was the way you did it, the way it actually unfolded in history with the two characters, the male and female characters?
Yes, the outline is basically entirely factual. Sarah Page, the white woman who was Mary in my novel, was an elevator operator. And this is at the time post the war where a lot of women, went to work when you really weren't supposed to, according to a lot of people. But she was an elevator operator, and Dick Rowland was a shoe shine, and he's called Joe in my story. And in those days, in order for you to go to the bathroom as a Black man, you had to go up 14 flights of stairs to get to the bathroom that you could use. And apparently Dick decided this day, no, I'm going to take the elevator. Now they think he might have stepped on her toe. Nobody really knows, but she screamed. And in screaming, Joe knew he had to run, that here comes the lynching team. And that is exactly what happened. Nobody actually knows what happens. And so I imagined what I think happened in the elevator. So you've got to read the novel for that. But why I tell it from the multiple points of view back and forth between Joe and Mary is that the real Sarah Page did not let the white community and the judicial system use her body as an excuse to murder a Black man. And that's totally unlike the death of Emmett Till, where the white men were exonerated, or many other events in history where, the white gets exonerated for murdering, lynching, torturing, Black people. Sarah Page in court refused to testify. Sarah Page said nothing happened. Nothing happened. So one day in the newspapers are saying she's a poor, orphan, struggling, working girl. And the next day they're calling her a whore, a prostitute, and ran her out of town. Now I came up in not only the Black cultural movement, but the feminism movement too. And I knew if there was one woman, one white woman who said, this did not happen, that there was the possibility that there were other white women who were brave enough to stand and say, this didn't happen. So I wanted to celebrate her courage and also celebrate the courage of Joe, who does something very unexpected by the end of the book.
Right.
Yes,
I love that. I love that it was really unexpected circumstances, although we all only hear that 300 people were murdered. But so it's like the opposite thing. A mass massacre occurred, but among the two people that were the catalyst for it, you know, something that kind of went against history and for the good. So
Yes, yes, yes. And playing with that, that there were a lot of people in the time period and following in the past 100 years who have worked relentlessly to bring this story to light. The Jewish community, people in the white community, and the Native Black community. That allyship, I think, is in part what has made it possible to bring the story really to the moment that we have in time. Also, it's ironic that when the massacre happened, it happened on Decoration Day weekend, which was called Decoration Day prior to be called Memorial Weekend, when Oklahoma became a state. So George Floyd also was murdered on a Memorial Weekend. And that connection struck me right in the core. And I remember watching television during the protests of George Floyd's murder, and a Black woman was shouting, and she was talking about the Tulsa Massacre. And that was the first time in my life that I had seen on national TV anybody reference the Tulsa Massacre. And then I knew that, the truth will out. The narrative had been gaining ground and people were uncovering it. And this is just part of that continuing push for this 100th anniversary memorial, but we're still waiting justice.
yes,
Justice.
I love that you got into the head of a Black man and a white woman. So how did that go for you?
It was
challenges.
Well, I had it a little bit easier with women, and I had just done my big first novel about voodoo dreams and Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen. But it took me 6 months to get Joe's voice, and I can't write not unless I hear the voice. And I would write pages, and my husband would read them and say, "Oh, a man doesn't talk like that," or "That's not right." And I would throw the pillow at him and get really upset. But it took me 6 months. And finally, I got it. And when I got it, it meant a lot to me. I always felt that Voodoo Dreams was a praise song for women's spiritual power. And actually tonight when I read, I've changed my mind about what I'm going to read. Because even though I praise women, Black women, and white women's inherent power as women, I also praised in this book Black men in a way that was a revelation for me. Trying to understand how you could be, a Black man who would agree willingly to risk your life for a country that really did not treat you with any sense of equality, how you were willing to die for it. So I read tons of war literature, of these brave, heroic men. It's like the Tuskegee Airmen, all that they went through. It's like, wow. And then you come home and you're treated with such disrespect. So they're actually, in my mind, for one of the starring characters, I imagined Denzel playing the part. So there's a character here named Gabriel. So there's like Joe and Mary, religious, there's religion in there with Moses and Harry Houdini in his spiritualism in Jewish.
Right.
But Gabe, I imagined he was this gorgeous Black man in one of these, those coats that go long, and he's like the avenging angel. And in my mind, I thought that was Denzel.
You got that characterization down.
I know. So, but it is
great.
It's a praise song to all people, of course. But I am proud that I did praise these men who were brothers, cousins, who saw to it that Dick Rowland, was not lynched in actual fact. So the anecdote is that when they jailed, this young man supposedly for assaulting a white woman, all of the Black men, the brothers, cousins came out and they brought their guns with them, and they were ready to see due process. They just wanted it to be fair and just. They did not start a riot. They did not start the massacre. And apparently the white men were really upset that they had guns. And one of them said, "Boy, disrespect, what are you going to do with that gun?" And the answer from one of the Black men supposedly was, Well, I'll use it if I have to. And boom. Now, I'm not 100% sure that that story is true, but I can certainly believe or feel a kind of truth in there. But it is important to note that there was no action that justified this massacre. None at all. All of it was trumped up, from the white woman, black woman, black sexual assault to, oh, they came and they were trying to dig out of jail. All of that is not true. That they, as a community, were still fighting for equality and fairness and for our judicial system to work in their favor.
What resonated with me is that it seemed to have jumped off from the newspaper headline. I thought it was quite interesting that you wrote that the local newspaper was losing circulation. And so they put on a headline that a rape occurred.
Yes.
To get people to buy the newspaper, and then people believe that, and it went from there.
Yes. So, I mean, so the whole idea of sensationalism, selling newspapers, I think some people hear the truth of that, though I do respect journalists enormously. And I see a true journalist as being distinct from, magazines or journals that are into sensationalism. But yes, they sold an awful lot of papers for the ones who wanted to talk about, Joe Dick Rowland as a kind of monster who's invading the sanctity of white womanhood. That was all just such a stereotypical racist lie.
And people accepted that, and that is what really started it all.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. You might want to let us all know too about you mentioned Voodoo Dreams, your other books, because you also write young adult novels, and I got familiar with your work through the writer's guides, the wonderful writer's guides you did on how to write fiction and African American Guide to Nonfiction, which I'm sure is still gangbusters because no one has done anything like close to that. So can you let us know about your other books as well, please?
Oh, well, I'm proud of all my babies. I began my writing career with a commitment to telling stories of African American culture, as well as doing multi-ethnic representation. So you'll see that I have stories that talk about the Asian community, the women's community, Native community, Creole community. And that all comes out of the fact that I did not know that Black women wrote books or Black people wrote books until I was a junior in college, because nobody had ever assigned or given me one, and I'm first generation college. So that's my mission. So Voodoo Dreams was like trying to understand, why does, Black hoodoo have such a negative reputation? And there's this historical character who was like the most powerful woman in New Orleans, and she was this Black voodoo queen. And that was a wonderful trail. Or Frederick Douglass, that his first wife never learned how to read. She was a Black woman. And I thought that was strange, because Frederick Douglass said reading freed him. So how come his wife didn't learn? How come he didn't teach her? Well, it turned out he had a mistress of 30 some years who was a white Jewish woman from Germany. And she used to stay at their house in upstate New York. And Frederick would commune with her while his wife took care of the children. So it's a whole interesting story, but it's very complicated. And I rescued both those women from history, because without the white woman, without the Black woman, Frederick could not have done what he had done. And you can go on and on and on. But I always wanted to write for children. And when Katrina hit, that was when I got my call to write Lanisha, my character, in Ninth Ward, because my publisher actually sent me to New Orleans 2 weeks after the hurricane hit and the levees had broken, because I was publishing and promoting an adult book about New Orleans. But when I saw that city, I just knew I had to write about the children and write about the animals. So since then, I've written a lot of books for youth. My two most recent are Ghost Boys, which is about the death of Emmett Till and inspired by the death of Black children by police. And there's actually an article in the Washington Post that's particular about policing of children and how often the outcomes are so horrific. And then Black Brother, which is about biracial brotherhood and how we have colorism, so that two brothers, same parents, one has brown skin, one has white skin, but that makes all the difference for how they're treated in the world. And then my newest book that'll come out in September, Paradise on Fire. It's
we get a glimpse.
those wildfires.
Preview.
Yes, yes. So Addie Aduago is a city girl who comes out west and finds out that she's great as a Pacific Northwest person, and she actually helps her colleagues and friends survive a wildfire. But it's really about promoting change, climate change, and you know, better stewardship of our planet Earth. So I write wherever my spirit moves me, and I don't plan to stop.
Oh, we're so happy to hear that. Thank you so much. My last question is, would you like to read some from Magic City to get a sense of that?
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to read just a very short portion so I could hear questions from the audience. I love to talk to people, and this is, besides my wonderful sort of connection with you, Miss Oliver, I wish I could see all the people in the audience right now and give you a big hug and we could all have a chat. So I'm going to read a short section. This is the beginning. This is a section that took me 6 months to get this right, all right? Sunday, May 29th, 1921. Joe Samuels had decided to quit dreaming, decided to stop dreaming of leaving Tulsa, of discovering new horizons streaked with magic. Yet here he was, lying by the tracks, his head to the ground, listening to the rumblings of the 945 preparing to leave, trailing Pullman cars and flat cars loaded with cotton and crude. Weary, disoriented, Joe needed sleep. He wanted to ride the rails over the Rockies to the Pacific in a sleeper car, cozy, dreamless in an upper bunk. He didn't want to dream of dying. 3 nights in a row, he'd had the same dream, a dream that he sensed was something more than a dream, a haunting, a premonition, an evil worked by the devil. And I'm going to stop there, but he has been dreaming of basically the massacre. He's had a prophetic vision that it's going to happen. And so he wants to make a bet with the devil. You know, I'll stop dreaming. I'll stop wanting to leave Tulsa. I'll stop wanting to sort of like, you know, break out of my parents', you know, sort of like clingy sense of what I should be, you know, as their young son, that I'll just give up everything if only I know that my family, my community will still live and that I will not die via lynching. So that's how the novel starts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that passage with us, and thank you for the book. Again, it's Magic City, and a reissue of the book that came out in 1997, was it?
Yes, I think that's right, 1997.
Just in time for the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, which will be May 31st.
Oh.
Now, I'll turn it over to Stasha, who has questions from the audience, and we'll see what they all wanted to know.
Yes, come on, folks. What do y'all want to know?
Well, first, I want to say thank you to both of you. That was a wonderful conversation and just so rich, and we could just keep chatting, couldn't we?
Yes, we could.
So for folks that haven't done so yet, if you'd like to ask the authors a question, you can just post that in the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of your screen. We do have one question that will get us started, one brave soul who dipped their toe into the water. So Summer asks, can you speak to the history of the Black community in the Central District and the parallels between Magic City and this history? And so I think that might be both of you could have a conversation about that maybe.
Actually, I think it's a question for Miss Oliver. Summer, I moved here literally 2 months before the pandemic. So I have not moved beyond my apartment at all. And there's so much for me to discover about my city. Obviously, I know about the Central District, African American Museum, but I do not know it the way that Miss Oliver, who is a lifelong Seattle person, knows it. So please speak to that, Miss Oliver.
That's a good, thank you. That's a good question. And I just think back to the 1960s when it was when the Central District was 70% Black. Now it's 17% Black, I've read now. People were not able to move to other communities. And so they forged a wonderful community. The Central District was a wonderful community. The same people I went to school with were people I saw at church on Sunday and that were in my neighborhood too, down the street. So it was a very wonderful place to grow up. At the time, Seattle was 10% Black. And when I went back east, it had never even occurred to me that there were cities that were predominantly Black. The 10% was what we also were in the country. So it seemed to be representative of America to me. And the Central District was a wonderful place with the Liberty Bank, which now has been reclaimed and made into apartments on 24th and 23rd and Union. I lived on 25th, right 2 blocks from there, where I grew up. And then we moved here, like other families, once the fair housing rules were lifted and people knew they had to start to sell their homes to African Americans. We were able to move out in other areas. But now it's been, unfortunately, so priced out for most people that it's gone even further south out of the city to Renton and Kent and other neighborhoods. But at least we know that people are somewhere in the general area and that they still call the CD their spiritual community home.
With the recent Joe Biden's infrastructure move, he's spoken about trying to give some kind of justice to African American communities that were basically segregated or actually had construction projects such as railways or, freeways go through their community, which then destroyed that vibrant community and, didn't leave room enough for maybe some Black communities to regroup. This happened a lot in Louisiana and elsewhere. But one theory about why the Tulsa massacre also happened is that some of the oil men wanted a train track to carry out the fuel more, easily and efficiently. And so that they wanted to build a train to the land of Deep Greenwood, and that was really what the grab was all about. But Black communities, it's a contradiction. They get segregated, and then at the same time as they're segregated, people take this idea, oh, well, we can just take your land and build a freeway. And the thing about, say, connections of environmental racism with Hurricane Katrina in the Ninth Ward, it was really like that. Black people or poor people have always been given the bottom land. So when the levees broke, people who were primarily white or wealthy, they had the upper land. So they didn't get the kind of flooding. But it also speaks to the idea that as a segregated sort of Black poor community to the Ninth Ward, they knew the levees were going to break. They knew it for decades, but they didn't pay to fix them. They didn't want to spend the money. And that was why disproportionately Black people got hurt. So a lot of infrastructure needs have disproportionately hurt the Black community, as well as segregation and as well as, not having fair housing. I do, what is it? The Color of Law is a wonderful book on fair housing and segregation and how the US government actually participated in making segregated communities that were apartment high-rises, at least on the East Coast for Black people, and outlawed suburban homes for Black people, and how many of the GIs, when they returned from World War II, were not permitted to get the GI loan to use it for fair housing. It's a very interesting book, and I would imagine some of the dynamics also might have played here too in Seattle, similarly.
I just want to say that Seattle too, when they're speaking of Black Wall Street, did have a lot of Black businesses. We had, the barbershop. I can think of the drugstore that Mr. Gideon owned. retirement homes that they've built for the community. So it really, really was a thriving.
Yes, yes,
It's
yes.
still special to go back, to go there. And then for the people that still live there, we still do have, Black folks in that community, and thank goodness they are there.
Yes.
Thanks to both of you. We had the pleasure of hosting Richard Rothstein when the Color of
Oh,
Law
yes.
was published, and so I just posted a link to the podcast for that if folks were interested in listening to that talk. It was very interesting,
Very interesting.
and there is a lot of parallels about Seattle's history and our covenants and sunset laws and Sunset Town stuff. So yeah, definitely give that a listen. So we've got a few more questions coming in. Laurel asks, what do you do to make your book so compelling in the first few chapters? You spoke about making your dialogue of your male characters strong. What did you do to make that happen?
You know, magic. But thank you for your comments. I actually, when I write, I actually have to really, in my heart, become the character. So when I heard, I will think of what would it be like to be a Black man, to have all the constraints of prejudice and all those things on you, your parents, who are bankers, who want you to, like join the bank, but maybe you want to like, no, I want to go to California, or all those things. And I just sort of feel it. And that whole idea of dreams and what do dreams mean. So Joe Samuels dreamed of getting out of there, which most teenagers do. But then there's magic and spiritualism and the train and all of that, and then the sense of the dream, and it just bubbles out. So this is true that generally the first page of all my books just pour out of me. And if you're going to be in an English literature class, if you look at literally the first page, the first scene of any one of my books, you can see a lot of the images, a lot of the themes, a lot of the, symbols and metaphors that are going to play out in the novel. It's almost as though somehow unconsciously the spirit moves me and it goes boom. And then I just try to fulfill what I've gotten. I don't know how I write the books that I write. I really, truly don't know. It just happens. And so far, I've been able to write I've been able to write whatever book that I've started. And I think that that's because I don't start it, not unless it's something that's really gripped my soul, that I need to write about it. And needing to write about it is much more important, or needing to know too about the history, much more important to getting published. Publish is secondary. I've always written exactly what I needed to write.
That's great. And it actually ties into another question from Mo, who asks, you say you write that which the spirit moves you to. Do you write every day and a particular time and methodology?
No. I used to try to do that, and then I figured out that I probably needed to be rich and I needed to have a full-time wife, in the old use of what wives do. We know wives are so brave, and not just women, but and I used to beat up on myself that I wasn't writing 8 hours a day. And so I learned to give myself a lot of self-love and self-compassion. And when I was a young mother, I would only write during the middle of the night, because I was mama, and so I was there for the kids and did all the things that needed to be done. And then when they went to sleep, I would write. But in truth, a lot of my writing comes from dreams. So I count that. And so all of a sudden, say in Ghost Boys, which is about the murder of young Black kids, there's a major character in there that didn't appear till like a year and a half after I was writing the book. And literally it was because my editor said, Jewel, how did this young kid get the toy gun? And I said, oh, good question. And I went to sleep. And when I woke up, there was Carlos, and he was there. And my husband tells me I talk in my sleep, and I'll be saying, oh, and Johnny went out the window and telling stories. When I'm walking with my dogs, I'm thinking about characters and stories. When I'm washing dishes, also music. Every book has its own soundtrack. And that soundtrack helps me get into the mood. So lots of times I'll say, okay, here's an album, like 1 hour and 15 minutes. Okay, Joel, you're gonna sit here and try to write for 1 hour and 15 minutes till this album is done. And if it's going poorly, then I go, that's it, I'm done, and go do something else. But if it goes well, then it's like, oh, okay, I'll start that soundtrack all over again. So my poor husband and family have sometimes for 2.5 years have listened to the same album over and over again. So I don't write every day, but I try to make the spirit move. But if it doesn't move, I know all the thinking and dreaming is still at work in my soul and spirit. And so I'm pretty relaxed about that now, because fundamentally, the work still gets done. So everybody, if you're a writer, learn what works with you for you. Don't follow models that people say you shouldn't be doing it this way. Learn what works for you.
I love that. And Stephanie, I'm going to ask you that same question since we've got you here. But before I do, I want to ask you, Jewel, was there a soundtrack for Magic City? Do you remember?
Actually, for Magic City, it was very, very interesting, but I was in a lot of the blues tradition. So actually the songs like How Long, Baby, Has a Train Been Gone? Those stories about, getting on the train and leaving town. But also one of the characters, and this isn't as much in the new edition, was into the 1920s musicals. So No No Nanette was a big deal. So I don't know if you remember that song. Yeah. I want to be happy, but I won't be happy till you're happy too. And actually there's just a tiny clip in the book because we weren't able to get the rights and royalties to use that in time. So it was sort of like Broadway musicals. Oh, the world is so wonderful, especially if you're a white girl who can tap dance. And then this blues tradition that's coming and talking about the longing, how long, and that yearning for freedom. So that the WPA project, Blues Project, was a big deal. And then the old sort of 1920s musicals.
I love that. Now, Stephanie, you had a little time to think. What's your writing process?
I used to say that none of my 4 books was written. Not one word of any of my books was written before 6 o'clock because I'm a night writer, and from just doing homework when I was in school, it was always later after dinner and up until the night cramming for tests. So that was my habit. And I wrote most of my books in Montclair, New Jersey, with the jazz station on in the background. And so I knew every song they played every night in the middle of the night. And usually Walter Beasley and, a lot of jazz greats that, I still think of when I think of those books. But my book, Song for My Father, is a song title itself. Song for My Father was a jazz tune and that I happened to learn to play on the piano from Dean Sudakawa, who is a jazz great here in Seattle, who was one of my mates at Franklin High School.
Oh, and recently passed, right?
Yeah. Yes, he just passed. And we're going to have our reunion this year, and I know everybody's going to miss him. He taught me how to play that on the piano because we sang in the school choir together, and after class he would play the piano for me. So every single chapter of that book is a song title. So yeah, I know what you mean about having a playlist.
That's great. Well, so we have, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just said absolutely.
Okay.
Want me to answer the last couple questions real quick? I can, Stesha.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever you want to, okay?
That would be great. That would be great. We have just a couple more. Craig asks, Dr. Rhodes, have you read Carol Boston Weatherford's recent picture book on the Tulsa Race Massacre?
Absolutely, my dear friend, colleague, Craig, who welcomed me to Seattle before I even lived in Seattle. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to do an event with her for Politics and Prose. The two of us are going to talk about
great.
Magic City and her picture book about the massacre. So I'll send you the information through Twitter if you like.
That's great. And then we've got all sorts of great questions. So then Carol asks, and this kind of relates to that maybe, were you a reader as a child? Were your parents, what were your childhood literary references?
When I was 8 months old, my mother left the family. So I actually ended up being raised for a part of the time with my grandmother. And then another part of time, my mother came back when I was entering the 4th grade. And by the time I was 15 years old, I was basically homeless, and we had to go from California back to Pittsburgh to go live with my grandmother. So in that kind of home environment, books were not key, and we couldn't also afford books. But my grandmother had wondrous African-American oral storytelling. She never finished the 3rd grade, but she had so much wisdom and grace and love, and she told me stories. So when I'm writing, I'm trying to channel my grandmother's voice. School teachers and librarians gave me books because I read voraciously, but again, they were all sort of about the white community and written by white authors. So once I got to college and found about Black women writers, then I was also open to explode and learn about my cultural tradition, connect it back to my grandmother. But I am one of the generation of assistant professors who fought to bring women's studies and ethnic studies to the academy. And in bringing it to the academy, it has percolated out, into the world. And I can't tell you how joyful it is that in my lifetime, like today I was Zooming with a class of 8th graders. They are no longer just reading one cultural group. Teachers all over from kindergarten to 12th grade are adding a diverse array of stories. So everybody, every culture needs their stories to be told, felt, and heard across time. But me, I kind of just, I got lucky. I was trying to imagine my way out of a circumstance where things were not good for me. But in mainly all of my books, and you will find, and you should look for her in Magic City, though, an elder Black woman who is my praise song, my sending love to my grandmother, because, and this is a woman's power, if she had not made the decision to take care of me and several other cousins, I would not be who I am. And she gave me a much more important spiritual literacy. But I am 1st generation college. So I'm really, I'm proud of that. But I'm also very aware that I carry multitudes in me that came from my grandmother, and that's what I want to pass down to my grandbabies.
Thank you for sharing that and for acknowledging the importance of oral tradition. I think sometimes in our, maybe it's about white supremacy culture or something, but we privilege the written word in a way, which of course we love the written word, at the library, but we also acknowledge that oral storytelling predates that and is a really important way of sharing story. So thank you for acknowledging that. That's great. I love that. We have just a couple more questions, and and Carol responds, thank you. That was a powerful story. Oral tradition sticks with us. So yeah, that moved to Carol as well. So I have 2 questions that are kind of related to the sort of the future for this topic. One is from Sonia and the other is from Jenna, but I think they're sort of related. Are there any schools or colleges in the US anywhere that offer courses on the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre? I believe this tragedy needs to be taught worldwide. That's from Sonia. And then Jenna asks, are there plans to make any of your books into films, and perhaps this one or others? And then do you think you will write about the Weeping Time, the largest sale of enslaved people in US history? So actually, those are 2 different questions. So sorry.
Okay.
When I was scanning, they looked related, but.
Well, in terms of the schools teaching Tulsa, Oklahoma, I know that a lot of historians have been teaching it, and actually teaching Tulsans who, like, when they went away to school, they learn about it and then go back home and say, what? How come I didn't know? I taught about it this past semester, but I don't, and I know that Scott Ellsworth, who's a professor at the University of Michigan, teaches about it. So I think it is becoming more known in popular culture. And I agree with you, everyone should know their story. At the time that Magic City came out, there was talk about making it into a film, but there was a whole 3-year period of race massacres across the country in response to, you know, the times. And John Singleton, I believe, made Rosewood about the massacre that happened in, I think, Georgia. And actually, I got a lot of comments then that they wish they had known about the Tulsa story because they thought it was much more interesting and complex, that it sort of also broke the stereotype of the young man, you know, and of the young white woman saying, yeah, this happened to me. And so, but nothing happened. It's with a film agent again, and something might happen. My youth books, though, have been sort of picked up a lot for people working on films for a lot of my youth books. So that's all in the works. So in Voodoo Dreams, more people than you could ever count have tried to make movies with that. You know, so one of the things, films are wonderful. I would love for it to happen. But again, I just do what I do, and what the world does with it is what happens. So even now with the reassessment and bringing to light Magic City again, it still comes back to the fact that fundamentally I did what I needed to do that years ago in the 1990s when I started writing it, that if I hadn't done that, we wouldn't be having this moment. So we'll see. And actually now I think this, I don't know what the weeping time is. So see now you, Jenna, you see, that's exactly how I get started on a story. It's like, what is that? How come I didn't know that? So now I'm going to have to research that, and it just might become a book of mine. So thank you. Oh, Rosewood was in Florida, somebody said. Thank you very much. Yes, and I know there was one in Atlanta, another race massacre in Atlanta, and in Chicago, you know, and there was a tale in Kentucky. But thank you all for that, and thank you very, 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 very much. And now I've got some homework to do, and you're going to inspire me to tell many stories. Or if I don't maybe one day tell it, you know, I don't want to take your story. Maybe you should tell it, Jen. Yeah, maybe that's your story to share with the world. And if you decide to write about it, just, you know, send me an email, and I would be very much happy to help you in your writer's journey and share with you, anyone, my agent sources, Distal and Goderich, they're wonderful, and help you, because if I had not been helped, I wouldn't be here today either. So artists, we are good people. So speak your truth and let me know if I can help.
Oh, that's beautiful. And of course you have 2 books that are guides as well that are,
Yes.
yeah.
I've been teaching creative writing for 40 some years, and sometimes writing books will talk more about getting published. And those books basically are intermediate to early advanced level writing technique and skills. It can, in fact, I believe to a certain degree be taught, and I can help make you better. The difference is that I'm teaching in those books, I'm just using examples from the African-American cultural tradition, you know, to sort of reinforce the points that the stories about how to make a good character are still all the same. But when I first started writing as a junior in college, my classmates said to me, "Why didn't you tell me your characters were Black?" And I go, "Well, why didn't you tell me your characters are white?" But I realized that I had learned to read white and waited for people to tell me what the ethnicity was of the characters. And so as a writer, I just wasn't going to do that. And Toni Morrison, of course, was the best at that, you know. So writing a home place, it would have been useful to me in all my creative writing classes to have examples from traditions that weren't just simply white Western narratives.
Yeah, for sure. That is, yeah, amazing. Jenna says that Jenna will take you up on that. Thank you.
Okay, and Jenna, I mean it. If you have trouble reaching me, you know, sometimes I get tons of emails. Try again. It is hard to write a book, and for the people who sit down and do it, I'm actually a really good novel mentor. I really am. And oh, you might have had her, Tiari Jones in American Marriage, Oprah Winfrey. She was my student. I convinced her to leave Georgia and come and study with me in Arizona. She still is working with my literary agency. I have so many I'm so proud of so many of my students, my other like writer kids, you know. So I have lots of stories, but I think I'm actually a better teacher than I am a writer. So
Oh,
I have fun and the privilege of helping people with the writing. So if you do the work, I'll be there to help you. And beyond that, I actually like it. So it's fun to figure out how to put that stuff together, you know. So give me a holler, okay?
oh, that's so beautiful. And what a nice way to end tonight. I'm so appreciative to both of you for sharing your time and your stories with us. Thank you so, so much. Um, I just want to let the attendees know that copies of Jules and Stephanie's books are both available through our friends over at Elliott Bay Book Company. They are open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, or delivery, and you can find books at their website, elliottbaybook.com, and we will post links to their the specific books in the chat again, just so that you can copy and paste, make that real easy for you. You can also find both of our wonderful authors' books at the library, and the library's URL is spl.org. We are grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Thank you to our program partners over at Northwest African American Museum and for all of their work in the community. And we're so grateful to our friends over at Elliott Bay Book Company and all of their work in the community. And we're grateful to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you spending your evening with us, and we will see you next time. Good night, you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night. Good
Bye.
night.
Thanks.